Good morning. Scripture today is Ezekiel 37, 1 through 14. And a couple things that'll make it easier to understand as I read it. At St. Andrews, we try to honor the Hebrew tradition of not saying the divine name. That if you read the Hebrew text, there's 4 letters, and that symbolizes the name of God, but you're not expected to say it. So what you do is you substitute. So as I'm reading this, you'll see those 4 letters, but I will give honorific names in place. And the other thing is, in Hebrew tradition, spirit means how things interconnect, how they flow. So when the text talks about the breath, talks about the wind, what we would hear is it's talking about the spirit. It's like the interconnectedness of things. So, and it's Ezekiel speaking in this verse. The hand of God was upon me, and it carried me away by the Spirit of the Holy One and set me down in a valley full of bones. God made me walk up and down among them. And I saw there was a vast number of bones lying there in the valley, and they were very dry. God asked me, mere mortal, can these bones live? I answered, only you know that, Sovereign Spirit. And God said, prophesy to these bones and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the one who created you. Sovereign mystery says to you, to these bones, I'm going to breathe life into you. I will fasten sinews on you, clothe you with flesh, cover you with skin, and give you breath. And you will live. And you will know that I'm sovereign compassion. So I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I prophesied, suddenly there was a noise, a rattle, and all the bones came together, bone to matching bone. And as I watched, the sinews appeared on them, flesh clothed them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. Then God said to me, prophesy to the wind, prophesy, mere mortal, and say to it, thus says sovereign wisdom, approach from the 4 winds, breathe breath and breathe on these slain that they may live. I prophesied as I was commanded, and breath came into them. They came alive and stood up on their feet, a vast multitude. Then God said to me, mere mortal, these bones are the whole house of Israel. The people kept saying, our bones are dry, our hope is gone, and we are doomed. Prophesy, therefore, and say to them, thus says sovereign life, I'm going to open your graves and raise you up from the dead, my people. I will return you to the land of Israel, and I will open your graves and raise you up. You, my people, will know that I am eternity. Then I will put my spirit into you, and I will return you to life, and I will settle you back on your own land. Then you will know that I, your essence, has spoken and made all this happen, says sovereign love. This ends our reading for the morning.
Let us pray. Eternal God, incarnate word, spirit of flame and dove, enlarge, expand all living souls to comprehend your love, and help us all to seek your will with wiser powers conferred. O God, grant yet more light and truth to break forth from your word. Amen. So I have this theory that a lot of us think we know Bible stories that we learned in Sunday school, but that we haven't actually ever stopped to pay attention to the parts of the story that didn't make it into our illustrated Bibles. We were taught all of these lovely, simple Bible stories, and then maybe we did a cute craft to go along with them. And maybe we even learned a catchy song, and then that was pretty much that. And so we got to our adulthoods and we say to ourselves, oh yeah, I know that story in the Bible. I even remember a little ditty we sang in our children's choir about it. And somehow we never make room to reflect that the stories we learned in Sunday school are actually much richer, much more complex, and in many cases, much more disturbing than we were led to believe in the Sunday school classroom. Exhibit A of this phenomenon: nearly every adult I've told that I'm preaching on Ezekiel's vision of the Valley of the Dry Bones has responded by singing, dem bones, dem dry bones. And it seems like that is pretty much all any of us were really taught about this particular Bible story as kids. And so I have come to suspect that this story from Ezekiel 37 is one of those Bible stories we all think we know, but few of us have spent much time really thinking about. It's a story about bones, right? And the bones come to life because of God. And that's the story, right? Well, as it turns out, I actually think there's a lot of depth and nuance to this story. And so I'd like for us to examine it a little bit more closely. And first of all, we need some context. This is from the prophetic book of Ezekiel. And as a prophet, Ezekiel was speaking to Israelites in exile. They were defeated, far from home. Their ruling house of David, which had given birth to the God-given kings for centuries, was deposed. And their temple, which they believed to be the literal physical dwelling place of the divine, was destroyed along with pretty much all of their holy city, Jerusalem. So the Israelites were in bad shape, like really, really bad shape. The exile was more than just a major political and cultural disruption. It was an existential challenge to the people of Israel, to their very understanding of themselves. With the temple destroyed and a sizable portion of the population deported, including many of the political and religious elites, the major touchstones for what it meant to be a Jew, an Israelite, a child of the one God of Israel, had vanished. Scholar Walter Brueggemann writes that the exile represented, quote, the end of any known world, the dismantling of any system of meaning and power. Even the Jews who were left behind in Judea were, in a very real way, in exile, every bit as disconnected from the defining institutions of king and temple as their deported neighbors were. So as I've been thinking about the disruption and the alienation and the dismantling that the exile represented for ancient Jews, it's been hard not to think also about the disruption and alienation and dismantling that so many of us are facing right now. Because you don't need me to tell you that it has been a hard year. Well, really, it's been a hard 18 months. Well, really, it's just been hard, period, for a while now. Thinking back on what has made the last year hard, it's incredible to think that the election was less than a year ago. An election that ended up including conspiracy theories, that culminated with the president bullying journalists and governors and legislators and even the vice president. An election that caused many of us to fear, myself included, that we're witnessing the collapse of US American democracy. An election that was in the midst of being certified when a violent mob of our fellow citizens, egged on, of course, by the president and his cronies, overran the US Capitol in an attempt to prevent the peaceful transition of power, one of the hallmarks of our understandings of ourselves as a nation. The defining institutions of our political system which for many people in this country are seen quite literally as sacred, seem to have come through it all intact, but not necessarily unscarred. So that's our political life. But then, of course, then there's COVID and the long months approaching years that we've spent apart from one another, keeping our relationship at literal arm's length in order to keep each other safe. And the callous indifference of some to the well-being of their neighbors that has fractured communities and continues to put lives at risk. And then for us in Texas, then there was the winter storm and the deadly consequences of our state's sinful decision to put profits ahead of people. Then there was the abortion bill and the voting rights bill and the legislative attack on trans kids and the critical race theory bill and every other manner of wickedness and bile to come from our legislature. And then it has been a hard year. And it's certainly easy to look at all of that in our common life together and think that we are every bit as much in exile as the Israelites were. And that's just on the macro communal level. So many of us have felt alienated and unmoored in our own lives this year. Personal grief and pain and hardship don't stop just because there's an onslaught of public health and political and ecological crises. Just the opposite, really. Relationships end. Careers are derailed. Beloveds leave this life. Identities are dismantled. Certainties are shattered. Our stories may all be different from one another's, but I feel certain that I am far from the only one who has experienced my own personal feeling of exile lately. And yet, in the midst of it all, 2,500 years ago and afresh today, we receive a vision of a valley full of dry, lifeless bones. And we think we know the answer to the seemingly preposterous question that God poses. Mortal, can these bones live? We've got to give Ezekiel credit because he gives a pretty diplomatic answer. And if you read the whole book of Ezekiel, he's not necessarily known for his diplomacy. But here he gives the kind of answer that you learn to give in Sunday school. Only you know that, God. Suck up. But for me, at least, it's hard to imagine that I'd give any answer more polite than, are you kidding me? These bones can't live. They're dead and dry and broken, and living is the last thing they can do. And that is the whole problem, God. But as is often the case with God, the obvious answer, the answer constrained by our lack of imagination, turns out not to be the right one. God proceeds to answer God's own question, telling Ezekiel to do something that sounds just as crazy as asking if the bones can live. Prophesy to them. Tell these dry, lifeless bones that can't hear anything that the eternal mystery is going to breathe the spirit of life into them again. And because Ezekiel is a better prophet than I probably would have been, he does what he's told. He tells the bones that they will live, that the one who is going to fasten sinews on them and clothe them with flesh, and they will live and know the truth of God's love. And of course, that's exactly what happens because it's the Bible. And when Ezekiel further prophesies to the wind, the breath, the spirit of life enters into them, and there stands a multitude of the house of Israel, the shattered and divided people ready with new life to face together the new thing that God was preparing to do in their midst. So there's a couple things I want you to notice about this story. A couple things you may not have learned in Sunday school, but things I hope you'll hold on to when you find yourself confronted with a valley of dry bones. First is this. All of this business of bones coming to life happens because a prophetic word of love is spoken aloud. The crushing silence of death is interrupted. And that word is not spoken by just anyone. The one called to prophesy to the bones is very much himself at home among the bones. Ezekiel finds himself in Babylon, fully living the exile that the bones represent. The prophetic word that breathes new life into dry bones doesn't come from a scholar or a subject matter expert. It doesn't come from a billionaire or a politician or a celebrity. It comes from a neighbor. It comes from a place of solidarity, of shared experience. An Aboriginal rights group in Australia wrote the words that would become popularized by Lila Watson. If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. This is the posture that we must take as we strive to see new life breathed into the bones that surround us. The second thing I want you to notice is that we're not told what these bones look like once they're restored to life. We're not told whether or not the flesh that clothes them resembles in any way the skin they bore when they first lived. Remember that the resurrected Christ, although certainly still identifiably Jesus, scars and all, was unrecognizable to the disciples on the Emmaus Road until they broke bread together. There is no guarantee that the new life which blows among the ashes of the old will represent a comfortable return to the status quo. In earlier visions, Ezekiel's prophecies make pretty clear that the way things were going in Israel before captivity wasn't working, wasn't faithful to the calling God had placed upon the people. Most of the beginning of the book of Ezekiel is Ezekiel saying, in sometimes pretty dramatic and confrontational ways, y'all messed up and now you're in exile. Being open to God's life-giving spirit blowing through the broken places of our lives means being open to the possibility that things might be shockingly different from the way we're used to them. It means allowing God's breath to breathe new life into our imaginations, loosing them from the shackles of the conventional and the expected and the permitted. It means setting aside attitudes like, well, that's just the way it is. And I mean, there's no viable alternative. And we've always done it this way. Setting those attitudes aside to be blown aside by the fresh winds of new dreaming and radical creativity. And the last thing I want you to notice about this story is that the bones in the valley are not resurrected into an individual. The bones and sinews and flesh don't culminate in so-and-so who's now free to follow their bliss, or what's his name who's returned to the path of self-actualization. The Spirit of God blowing through the dry bones restores that which was broken into the house of Israel, the whole house of Israel gathered together. To find new life in God's love is to be situated in community. We are not fully experiencing the miracle of resurrection if we are not opening our hearts to the gifts and challenges of life in community. To be resurrected in God's love is to be part of something larger than ourselves, something that transcends our egos and our agendas and our individualism. I know, I get it. Community is messy and hard and painful, but I also believe with my whole heart that it is the soil from which God's love and justice grow. Exile is not just a historical oddity experienced by people from a different culture on the other side of the globe 2.5 millennia ago. It is a state of the soul with which I think all of us are familiar. One that confronts not just us, but also our neighbors and friends and those we seek to love. It even confronts our enemies and those we have a hard time loving. But even in the depths of a valley filled with the countless bones dried out by exile's alienation and uncertainty and despair, the spirit of God's love is blowing like the wind. That spirit speaks a word of love and liberation and compassion and solidarity. That wind blows right past the walls built up by the status quo to breathe new creativity into that which was once dead and dried up. And in the new life that is found when that breath envelops the dry bones, communities are forged and strengthened. And when the creative power of love and justice and solidarity blows on the winds of God's breath, together we find our answer to the question, can these bones live? Now, I don't usually like to tell you what to do with my sermons. I tend to hope that if I have faithfully proclaimed the good news of Jesus Christ, then the insights that are sparked by my words and the work of the Holy Spirit are going to yield much richer fruit than any attempt at practical applications I could make. I like to say that I compose my sermons so that you will write the last page in your own hearts after church. I'm going to break that rule today because there's a particular circumstance that was on my heart and mind pretty consistently over the last few days as I wrote the final drafts of this sermon. Some of you may have already heard that the church building was broken into several times this week. At least one of those times, the window to my new office was broken in the attempt to gain entry. Few small things were broken, taken, or disrupted. But from what I understand, we don't believe that the person who did this was aiming to steal any of the technology or valuables in the building, or to vandalize our property, or to cause mischief. It seems from what I've been told that their primary objective was to get a roof over their head for a time, to use the restroom, and to use our microwave. And when we hear this story, when we imagine the person breaking into our building, we don't have to look very hard to see where the bones of exile's alienation and disruption are scattered across this story. And so we are confronted with the same question that the source of life asks the prophet. Can these bones live? Well, can they? What would that look like? What would it look like to position ourselves to listen for the word of peace that could emerge from a place of solidarity with the people most marginalized in this story? From solidarity with our homeless neighbor, from solidarity with Ilda and Ivan, our immigrant friends whose home is being threatened anytime our church building is compromised. What new thing could God be doing here? If only we had the imagination to access it. How could this be a chance to participate in creative reimaginings of justice that center on care and community rather than punishment and retribution and isolation? How could this be an invitation to think creatively about what it means to own a building, about what safety and security mean in the context of a world marred by oppressive systems? And what, in this case, does it mean to find new life in community? Who exactly is our community? Or as the young lawyer asked Christ, who is my neighbor? How does our understanding of community challenge us to reach beyond our comfort zone into the new life to which God is beckoning us? I just asked a lot of questions, and maybe you had an assumption that I was going to hit you with some possible answers to those questions, but the truth is I don't have the answers. I don't think it's really my job or any of our jobs individually to come up with answers to them. I think that part of living in our world with all its sin and death and pain is that there aren't necessarily good, clean answers to hard questions like these. But I think that part of God's spirit of love, part of feeling God's spirit of love blow through our lives, revitalizing those places where we find dead bones, is being prepared to grapple together as a community of love and justice and peace with these very questions in response to that question that God asked the prophet. Can these bones live? Well, can they? Amen. I invite you now to your own reflection on these words.